Welcome to Innovation and Leadership. I'm Jess Larson. On this episode, I'm really excited to have Jess Mah. If you don't know about her, you're in for a treat. Jess, I am very excited to talk about so many different things, but to give people just a little bit of background, can you tell them about the 10 companies you built that have a collective value over $1 billion, and being a pilot and holding company, and bold bets on inventing a new future, especially in biotech?
Thank you for having me, Jess. First off, I think we have the coolest name ever.
Yeah, I will say, when I was a kid and somebody said Jess, they assumed your name was Jesse and you were a boy. And it's like, the scales have tipped and they assume that Jess is Jessica and you're a girl. So every once in a while I think about going by JR. That's what my dad used to call me.
I like Jess. Let's not
Keep
change
it?
that.
You gonna
Yeah,
keep it?
I
Okay.
used I used to be called Jessie as a kid. I mean, I was one of those rambunctious, rebellious, entrepreneurial kids. And when I was younger, I knew I always wanted to start businesses. And my problem was that I also knew I would not stop with one. And everyone out there says the best advice is to pick one thing and focus on that. That's all you should do, right? And my role model was like Richard Branson, who has like 300 Virgin companies under the Virgin brand, some ridiculous number. And he lives on his island and has a great life. And he's just so authentic. So I always admired him. I read all his books. I was totally obsessed with him when I was a teenager. And I wanted to do something like that, albeit with software, technology, fintech. So my first company in Dinero, financial management, software and services. And we had customers like Slack, Stripe, Pinterest, DoorDash, Instacart, Coinbase, you name it. We were powering their finance back office. And I grew that to a few hundred employees, owned most of it, had a little bit of angel money, but no VC money. And I realized that I really enjoyed the startup phase, getting it going, building out the management team. And I actually do enjoy operations too, Jess. I'm not just a pie of the sky visionary, woo woo type. I actually like to get my hands dirty and to be in the weeds and to look at the actual process for how we do things. But I think it's very difficult for me to context switch between being an operator versus being more the visionary. I like to pick one or the other, but doing both at the same time sucks. So I decided about 3.5 years ago that I would focus, if I'm going to focus my career in any way, it's my role. And my role would be, I've got lots of ideas all the time. I want to get them going. And I'm going to have a holding group. So it's called Mahway. My last name is Mah, M-A-H. So it's like My Way, right? I think that's a Sinatra song. And I don't think of it like a venture studio because we're not in the business of just making businesses for the sake of making businesses. We're in the business of bringing things to life that I'm inspired by and excited by, and then making sure that we have the right CEOs in place, give them support. So we've got recruiting people, product and engineering, AI people, etc., just to provide support at a more cost-effective rate to all my different endeavors. And some of them might not even be companies, Jess. Like, I don't only need to make profit making businesses. Like, I might fund some very early stage science that might not go anywhere. I'm happy for it to end up as a philanthropic endeavor or just as a fun side hobby too. But that's me in a nutshell. And yeah, collective valuation, in the billion, I think billion and a half number now. Of course, it's concentrated with like two or three, and then the rest are like much earlier. And yeah, my goal is just to have fun every day and to enjoy the people I work with.
It sounds awesome. There's the obvious examples, the Warren Buffetts, the Richard Bransons, and I kind of share your fascination with them. For me, it's one of the reasons I was so excited to talk to you about me. Obviously, first got connected through Greg Bailey, and then when again it came through Noah, I was like, okay, we got to make this happen. And I have a couple of mentors in my life who actually they are both former clients, but we're just friends now, and kind of like personal net worth kind of in the 250 million range. And the one has 12 companies in his holding company, the other has 6. And it like completely flew in the face of everyone who told me my whole life, you always have to focus, Jess. Focus, focus, focus. Your problem is you haven't picked your one thing that you're going to do for the rest of your life. And it was like so encouraging to me with my ADD-ness of the like, I love the startup phase and I actually don't like the operations phase. I just want to make sure it's done right. And if I don't have a good enough person, I'm like obsessed and I have to stay there. But I think I'm so inspired that like people like you exist, and it makes me feel like there's hope for me.
I mean, likewise, like I see all the things you're doing, Jess. Like you're having fun meeting people and you're bringing that back in to, make your business stuff better. And it's like a self-reinforcing ecosystem is how I see your life. Um, and I want to do the same thing in that sense, even if it doesn't necessarily make the most money per se you know, but who cares? Like we're going to do really well. We're going to have a great time doing it. That's really what matters. And I want to focus people back to that. Like, yeah, I think right now everyone's got a hard on for Elon and for Jensen Wang, and it's fine and all, but I want to remind everyone of all these other approaches, this ADD visionary approach that is a better personality fit for people like you and me, Jess. And I think that for anyone who's watching this, you really have to just evaluate yourself. Like, which bucket do you actually fit in? And instead of trying to contort yourself to someone else because you have a hard on for Elon, like maybe this is the better path for you, or maybe not. That's okay too.
I will say like, 1,000 episodes of this show now, it's kind of turned into like therapy for me to be able to be like, I've got to meet so many people like you that prove this way is possible, and it's like, it kind of like filters for crazy people, the show, right? And it's like, and I think the reason I think it's therapy for me is because I get to meet people like you who are not ashamed of the fact that they want to launch it and be big and own it, but don't necessarily have to run every single part of it for the entire rest of their life. And they don't feel like that's bad. So then I can feel like, oh, I'm allowed to feel that way too.
Yeah, exactly. And I think we could look at what feels bad. What is the story in our head? I think one is ego. It's like, all right, like, will I seem impressive enough at the cocktail party if I'm not saying that I'm the CEO of that business that is worth billions of dollars with hundreds or thousands of employees, right? Like that's kind of where it starts. And then the next thing is, okay, well, what do I actually want to do? Like, do I want to deal with the BS of having to have all these directors on my board breathing down my neck and all the compliance and regulatory BS? Do I actually want that? And a lot of people, I think, I have a lot of friends who think they want to be CEOs of public companies. And I say, well, before you do that, let me introduce you to like 10 of my public company CEOs who have resumes that you want and they hate their lives. They're absolutely miserable, but they have to go up on stage and do the analyst calls and make it seem like everything's great or their stock price is going to crumble. For half these people, it does eventually go through the ups and downs and volatility cycle. They're not having the up and to the right, Elon effect, let's say, they're not the next NVIDIA. And it's really difficult reckoning for a lot of them. And you don't hear about those stories too often. But what if we could dissect what is actually the motivation for doing what we want to do? What are the things we actually enjoy doing? And then what is the right path for you? So a lot of this is like doing some self-psychology, like doing some real therapy or coaching to understand this. I mean, you've done this yourself. Like how it must be difficult too to reckon with it sometimes. Or are you at the point, Jess, where now you're at peace with, how you do things today?
So I made what I thought was a lot of money in my 20s, lost it all. Became a millionaire again, lost it all again, and had this real like soul searching of like, I am doing something wrong. I'm doing something right, and I'm definitely doing something wrong, And that's when I really got obsessed with Warren Buffett. And I thought, What if I, instead of like I can grow something to the moon incredibly quickly, instead of that being the only thing I cared about, what if I looked at investing in business building as a martial art, like the Warren Buffett religion way, you know? And I love that he has 350,000 employees, except that he doesn't. He has 28 employees that work at Kiewit Plaza in Omaha that are just there to support him and just clean up his mess and like make his life easy. And like when he buys companies, he says, you have to bring management. We cannot supply it. Like he set that rule for himself that he will not run any of these companies. I mean, he has like the one famous exception of stepping in at Salomon Brothers during their crisis in the 80s.
Yeah.
And like out of what is that, like a 70-year career, he did it once, like, and I think it is too, just meeting people like yourself who have proven it's possible to ramp something up, own it, hire incredible people, and be the oversight instead of the day-to-day sit at the same desk, do the same thing. And there's part of me that wishes, like, I took a class at Stanford on entrepreneurship, and they're kind of talking about like how special Jeff Bezos is, that he can both start something and stay and grind it out as a public company for 20 something years. It was this like looked up to thing, and this like most people can't do that kind of thing, which makes me feel like a little bit bad about myself that I don't know that that's me, right? And then when I get to meet people like you and I get to hear, about, like you said, the way Richard Branson started 500 companies and 300 of them are still in business. And that's okay. He's still a billionaire, even though 200 of the businesses, some failed, some he shut down, some, and it made me, I guess it's kind of that idea of like, school system told me so much. There's one way for success. And, I got to have the billionaire Richard Koch, who wrote the 80-20 principle, on the show. He sold his consulting company for $5 million, and he grew that to $1.5 billion personal net worth, working in the early years, like 2 to 3 hours a day, and in kind of the last decade, more like an hour a day. By just emphasizing, like being maniacal about the 80-20 principle.
Wow. That's beautiful.
And even though most people got to that level of wealth by working 80-hour weeks and da-da-da-da-da, he proves that that's not the only way. Even if it's the most prominent way, it's not the only way. And I guess it gives me that personal permission to take the path less traveled.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have to recognize that there is media distortion out there where the media wants to talk about the people who sleep under their desk and work 100 hours a week and are the most productive. The 80-20, that's not sexy from a publisher's perspective. So I totally agree with that. And yeah, a lot of these stories, we don't hear about all the failures and all the problems and challenges along the way. Like on my side, I had like 3 companies last year that flamed out, Jess. Like I haven't talked about that publicly because no one wants to ask me about that. They only want to ask about the success and the good stuff. But I had 3 where I lost a ton of money and where they just were terrible, like big, stupid mistakes. And I had to go down the rabbit hole of just self-reflection. Like, how did we screw this up? Like, how could we do better in 2025? And yeah.
Can I ask you about this?
Sure.
There's this narrative out there, and it's extra perpetuated by like the New York investment banker crowd. I started out 20 years ago in investment banking at Citi in mergers and acquisitions. And like that kind of like Boston, New York world of like, especially in the investment world of like pretending you've never made a mistake. It's like a full-time sport, and it's so shameful to have ever lost money. And like, you can like jokingly say, of course people lose money at times, but nobody's like really honest about it because it's like a black mark. It's like, I took a couple of years off of finance and did leadership training for the Special Operations Command and Intelligence Agencies practice of a firm. And I had this 25-year Navy SEAL buddy who said, he talked about the hypocrisy in naval special warfare. And he said, there are guys that have accidental discharge which they've now added extra sigma and call it a negligent discharge, where he's like, there's a whole bunch of Navy SEALs that have shot themselves in the foot with their pistol by accident. And everybody likes to pretend that it's never happened. And it's only like some idiot reservist who isn't a real soldier that's ever done that. He's like, no, there are a whole bunch of like the most elite soldiers who've shot themselves in the leg, shot themselves in the foot by accident. And yet we all like to pretend that could never happen. It doesn't happen. And it's this incredibly shameful thing. How could you possibly do that? And that's like, it's actually seen as like a judgment on you as a person. Like you must be a low quality human to have made that kind of an accident. And there's a lot of that in like the more Ivy League of the investment world. And I think it's why, I was so happy to move. When I moved from Canada, I was so happy to move to California instead of the East Coast. Because the people like you who can say that without a lot of self-judgment, it gives permission for the rest of us not to have self-judgment.
Yeah. I mean, we're all criticizing ourselves on some level. It's just how do we demystify what's going on? I mean, I know of 3 billionaires this past year who've been going through some real business cash crunch struggles. People who you all would know about, who are on the cover of Forbes and everything. And they have these terrible problems that no one publicly knows about. And I think just knowing these secrets helps. That helped give you that permission to, yeah.
And I want to talk about this. I want to talk about separating. I would love your insight on separating I made a poor choice or this business had a bad result from your value as a human being, because of how often us entrepreneurs or investors can over-identify with what we do.
Yeah, I think about this and I reflect on this a lot. And I always go back to thinking about my dog. Because when I think about my dog, like I am madly in love with him, but he's also like very annoying all the time. Like barks at like any tiny thing that moves, or like if I do this, like he'll start barking. And up his head is like off the sofa. He's like, "What's going on?" There you go, right? Oh my God, Moo, shut up. Anyway, I love the guy. But the point is like we love our animals despite the fact that they didn't do anything to earn it. And it's like, all right, what if I could embody my own dog and be like that? And so that's giving you the permission to just chill out a bit and not over-identify. And weirdly enough, this whole fire situation in LA, that's just happened the past week. I would say I have dozens of friends here who've lost their homes. Half my YPO chapter lost their home. Like, it's a crazy number. What's the silver lining? Obviously, painful, devastating for most people. But some of the my friends who lost their homes, they've talked about gratitude. How, look, I'm just grateful that, I have the resources and I have the love and community to call in a favor and say, hey, can I sleep in your extra guest bedroom tonight or for a week? And it's brought out some more humility of like, we come into this world with nothing, we're going to leave with nothing, and we might, make and lose money along the way. And you talked about this yourself, how you were a millionaire, lost it, and that happened a few times. And imagine losing, all of your net worth when you're 50 because you just, I have one friend who bought 7 rental properties in the Palisades. Okay, all cash, all the money he ever made, he put into these rental houses, no fire insurance, and all they just burned down. Right? It sounds awful, but it's a humbling exercise here to realize that like he's realizing now all his friends still love him. All of us still think he's the most amazing guy ever. That's not changing. And we only realize that when we go through these losses. So there's a gift here. I mean, didn't you feel that way a little bit when you lost your millions during your 20s, Jess? That your real friends were still there and you were still valued?
And you also find out who your real friends are in that process. And it was really painful. It was really painful for the people who lost money with me. That was actually probably the worst part for me. my grandpa, my mom says my hero in life. If I ever grow up, that's who I want to be like, And losing his money was for sure the toughest of anything. And yeah, it is interesting though, having been through that a couple of times in my 20s, and still surviving. And like, I think I thought about that stuff. I know this is super logical, but I almost thought about that stuff as like unsurvivable. Like, can you imagine? That's the worst thing. That's like dying. No, it's not like dying. It just sucks. It just sucks for a while. And then you figure out what you're going to do about it and you pick yourself back up. Do you know this Ryan Holiday book, The Obstacle is the Way?
Yeah, I do.
So I'm a churchy guy. I read my scriptures, but I read a little bit of that book almost every day of my life. Instead of taking like Xanax or some like, depression pill or anxiety pill or whatever, I just read that book a little bit.
I love
every
Ryan
day.
Holiday. I mean, he wrote the book about Stoicism. He wrote, and he's got a great podcast called Daily Stoic, on YouTube. And I'll confess I do the same thing. I listen to his stuff like a few times a week.
I love it. Well, let's go the other direction for a minute.
Sure.
Talk about connecting. Tell us all about you and Noah's podcasts and events and all these things you're doing.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we have to think about our life in multiple dimensions. So obviously I've got the business side, build more businesses, make more money, whatever. Then, hobbies and family and friends and community and impact. And one community I have that I started, it's a few hundred members right now. It's called Badass Female Founders. We're the BFFs. And we're all over the US. And so if anyone's interested in that, shoot me a note, teamjess@maway.com, and we'll get you hooked in. And also launching a new podcast and events under Dose of Greatness, DOG. And that's with Noah Berkson, who actually I met on another podcast. So I did the My First Million podcast about a year ago. He cold emailed me and then we linked up for lunch, became really close friends. And I'm actually going back on My First Million on Monday, Jess, for round 2.
How fun. I love that show.
Yeah, so that's going to be dope. And yeah, so we're throwing a retreat in Park City. We're doing more events just like you. And it's just such a great way to meet people, have fun along the way, get new ideas. And as your idol, Warren Buffett, talks about all the time, it's like, how do you just think and get ideas? Like, what are the mechanisms to do that? And obviously you could read, he talks about reading the newspaper and reading books, right? But for us, a lot is just like meeting people and having these types of conversations, right? Like the best ideas and opportunities. People ask me this all the time. Where do your ideas come from? How do you come up with the idea? I never come up with the idea. I have a conversation with someone like you, Jess, and then you say, hey, have you ever thought about X, Y, or Z? I'm like, no, that's a good idea. Why don't we do that together? That's where all the ideas come from. And just like that, what you were telling me, before we launched into the podcast recording for what you're working on, I don't know if you're ready to share anything about it yet, but you also got inspired through someone else you had a conversation with. And how do you meet those people is the next question. Well, you throw your own events, you put together a podcast, like you put together a community like what I have with Badass Female Founders. Like these are mechanisms for sourcing ideas.
Well, I can 100% guarantee that my investment fund would not be getting, partnering with this new business that I started with the co-ownership group for the luxury homes, because though my partners in the co-ownership group company for the luxury homes, I met them off the podcast.
Oh, amazing.
And then came to my parties and stayed in touch and realized we shared a lot of similar views and spent some time, and I made some introductions for them. They did some favors for me and we built some trust. And long enough into that process, they called me and said, hey, we did this thing. It worked really well. Do you want to come do it with us? And I knew them. Like it wasn't just that they were so successful. Like I knew who they were. I knew what their values were, how they thought about the world. And it took me about 10 seconds to be like, yes, please.
Yeah, that's amazing. But these are like, a lot of the time it takes like months to nurture these relationships. I think everyone's very impatient. They just want to like send out an email.
Yeah, I think that was like That was like a year and a half, I want to say.
That's a real investment. And I'm sure you're gonna have more like that too. I mean, I love the way you're thinking about it. I think about it the same way. Like I've got one other lady I partner with on events. Her name's Juliet. So she and I are putting a lot of these things together. We threw a big New Year's party at my house, invited 300 people over, and we'll do stuff during Milken in LA. Put together another short event and do another crazy party at my house. And I meet people like after my last New Year's party, so end of 2023 coming into 2024, I'd meet people throughout the years like, oh my God, you're the person who had the sick LA New Year's party. You're like, all right, yeah, cool. And that would lead to like business conversations and stuff. It's just like so weird that from like a New Year's party it would, lead it to business value. But yeah, and it's fun too.
Yeah, it's super fun. I know people always want to talk to you about building multi-million-dollar business before you graduate high school and being a pilot and flying your jet around and these kind of things.
All the time.
But what do people not ask you about that you would like to talk more about?
What do people not ask me about?
Or just what are you most excited to talk about for 2025?
I think for 2025, I really want to talk more and think more about mindset and happiness and how to enjoy the journey of entrepreneurship. It's not a sexy topic. Everyone just wants to talk about how to get the outcome. But what I realized, I was doing my New Year's goals and resolutions coming into 2025, and I worked with my coach and my therapist on this. And most people, they're like, all right, I want to grow my EBITDA to X, tens of millions of dollars, or I want to grow my enterprise value to X billions of dollars, right? So I used to do that for like lots and lots of years. Like, all right, grow my net worth, whatever. And then what is the real goal? The goal is to feel a certain way. I want to feel financially secure. I want to feel stress-free. I want to feel inspired by the team I work with on a daily basis. But then I write down, I just want to make more money. But then I realized that I never felt good. I always felt stressed out. I always felt not good enough. But my actual goal is I want to feel whole. I want to feel good enough. So what if we could just shortcut and get to those feelings now without the outcome? Obviously, you still want to do all those big flashy goals, have the trophy on our desk, feel really good about our egos. But if you just shortcut to like the real feelings now, it'll actually make us more successful. If we feel whole, if we feel happy, if we feel inspired today, and what's the best path to get there today, then all the outcomes work themselves out. So that's kind of how I rejiggered my life. And I'd already organically been doing this a bit more the past year or two, but I'm trying to get more entrepreneurs to change the way they do their personal goal setting.
This is a fascinating subject to me. And just quickly, you're 34 now, right? When did you start your first business?
I'm 34 now. And then I finished college when I was 19, but I started my first business when I was 19. And then obviously other tiny air businesses in middle school when I was like 12.
Yeah. So you think about entrepreneurship from, I'm going to call it 12 to 34. Okay. And is it interesting? It's interesting that it takes so long for a lot of us to come to the conclusion that we don't want it to just be a saying, that we actually want to enjoy the journey instead of just like that thing that people say, Yeah,
everyone talks about it. I mean, every old person, when I was starting my company the first time, they're like, don't forget to enjoy the ride. Don't just look for the outcome. But the problem is they didn't really break down the steps for me. They didn't tell me like how making a goal of enjoying the journey would make me more successful. If they told me that, I would have taken this more seriously,
Yeah. So I'm in the middle of closing down one of our businesses for this exact reason. And it's because, we did it. We made a bunch of money. We did decent money. We didn't make great money. We made good enough money for it to be an ongoing business. And I realized I don't enjoy it. And it's like, we've got a reputation. It wouldn't be that hard to keep it going. But I'm just like letting the clients stay as long as they want. And then when they leave, we're not replacing them for this reason. And I think two things that come to mind. One, I was listening to Conan O'Brien interviewing Arnold Schwarzenegger. Okay. The obvious sources of deep intellectual philosophy. And Conan said something to Arnold about that he had never tied the concept of bodybuilding so much to failure. And he said that, like, literally every day it's going to this point where the muscles fail. And that's where the growth comes from. That's where the strength comes from. And then Arnold talked about, he responded and said, absolutely. And how you have to, like, fall in love with that process. Like, you have to enjoy that process, not just the big muscles at the end.
Uh-huh.
And I compare it to snowboarding. I'm a real diehard snowboarder. I almost didn't go to college in my attempt to be a pro snowboarder, you know, and it kind of translated into my love for surfing. But it's not actually that great to be at the bottom. Like, it's actually the snowboarding that's the fun part. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's a great example.
And I think for so often, like, I had jobs where the fun part was spending the money. It was not, even at City, part of investment banking at City was cool. I thought it was fun as a challenge. But, like, there's a lot of watching the clock and can't wait till I can go surfing on Saturday, you know? The idea that, like, you can actually just choose a business or choose an investment style that feels more like snowboarding instead of feeling like the job that you can't wait till 5 o'clock, you can't wait till the weekend. It's I don't know. The best time of my life was in my late 20s when I was an investment fund manager. And I kind of look at, like, if I'm honest, I feel like I've kind of wasted the last decade of my life messing around with these small little dinky businesses. It's like, oh, well, that's easy money. I'll just do that quick. And then I'll get back to running investment funds. And, like, for me, coming to this conclusion of, like, that's who I want to be when I grow up. Like, I love this kind of holding company, investment manager approach to life. Like, that, like, if there's easier ways to make money, I kind of don't care. Like, this is who I want to be. This is my snowboarding. And it kind of sucks that I feel like it took me 10 years to get back to it. But then I'm also grateful that I'm no longer wallowed in the easy money and I was a CEO coach for a while and I got $500 an hour, no prep. I just got on and had fun and shoot the breeze, nothing, no follow-up, you know? And it was like that luring, like, just dumb easy money that kept me from what I actually wanted to do in life.
Yeah, wow. I know a lot of people who just love that because for them, the goal is simplicity in their life, having freedom, and that would be their dream. But for you, it wasn't. And I think that's really cool that you had that recognition. And I agree, I get sent all these very interesting opportunities to make fast and easy money, supposedly. And by the way, it's often the case not. It's often the case a fast and easy way to lose a lot of money. But I think the energy of the people who are drawn to that, I'm repelled by it. It's like it's like the energy of wanting to get rich quick. You have a lot of crypto people who are like that. And the worry for me is, what does this person's career look like on their deathbed? Like, what will they be really proud of having built over many decades? And how do you, in my case with Maui, I've got real institutionalization of knowledge. Like, we're really building up a ton of experience in how we do things that if, I just did one or two one-off opportunities, I wouldn't get that muscle building. I talk about this concept internally, kodawari. Have you heard of kodawari? It's a Japanese word. I love kodawari. It's the pursuit of excellence. Have you watched Your Dreams of Sushi?
I know that film. I have definitely seen the trailers for it.
It's amazing. I highly recommend it. Especially if you
How
like
do you
eating
spell that
sushi.
word?
Kodawari. Kodawari.
And how is it? What are the implications or differences between that and Kaizen?
Well, Kaizen's you're like constantly doing, it's like Kaizen improvements. It's like micro improvements versus Kodawari is more of this like broader, like the pursuit of excellence. They kind of interface with each other. They're
I
like
love that.
two peas in a pod. And it's like it's the mindset of Kodawari that I want everyone I work with to reflect on, because that also helps ground us to the present and to the journey of just we're just trying to do better every day, one foot in front of the other. And the act of improvement, the act of getting better is so fun. And if you felt like you're like, because I remember when I was in my 20s, I thought, all right, once I have one business that's making a few million bucks and, my net worth is whatever, then I'll feel great. And then I didn't feel great anymore. It's like, oh, shoot, actually, I felt better when I was earlier on, when I had nothing. And that was kind of my wake up call here. And I unfortunately think a lot of us just have to go through that experience the hard way. It is kind of hard for you to just like watch a podcast and fully feel that way.
That makes me think so much of painters and writers.
Uh-huh.
Originally I went to art school. I'm an art school dropout who accidentally got into investment banking. And those painters, like the really great painters and really great writers, they're not trying to like paint that one good painting so they can finally be done painting and enjoy life. It is like this pursuit of excellence for the rest of their life and the enjoyment of the activity, even though some of them also get very large financial rewards. Is that related at all to you?
I'll say so, yeah. I mean, now it is. That was not the case a year or two ago. 2 years ago, Jess, I was really struggling with still some basic stuff. Like I bought my first jet a little over 2 years ago. And I'm like, oh man, I want the bigger jet, right? And then I bought, a bigger jet and, whatever. And it's like it's endless. I was like, you know what? I'm still gonna be really freaking happy with what I have today. And the painter analogy, I love that. Like artist or chef analogy for how to enjoy, I think is perfect. And what we're doing at business in our businesses, it is an art form. Business doesn't just have to be a heady exercise. It could be a hard exercise where, it just feels good, and it could we live in our bodies more as we're doing these things. And one exercise I've been playing around with is before, if I look at everything on my calendar, I'll go through each one. How do I feel? Like, do I tense up and does my breathing stop if I look at a meeting? If so, then something is terribly wrong. That means that I am really not looking forward to this. Why am I not looking forward to this? Why does this suck? And why am I accepting that? Why do I tolerate having one thing on my calendar today that I really don't want to do? And how much of it is the reality of the situation versus just my own like story, you know? And so that's like another way of doing a calendar audit that I don't think people are talking about. It's not all about productivity. Sometimes it's just about fun.
Yeah. I did martial arts all my growing up years and some still as an adult. And I really love especially feudal Japanese architecture and art, and kind of a Japan nerd that way. So I've been rereading a book called Training the Samurai Mind, which is translations from, Japanese samurai and philosophers from the 1600s and 1500s and 1700s. And there's a lot of things similar to what you're talking about in that book. And it's interesting, separated by cultures and centuries, this commonality in the human experience. There's something you said I really wanted to talk about, though, and it's kind of this like Buddhist idea that work doesn't have to be pain, or we don't have to dislike work, that our work could be a form of love for others. And so I'd love for you to maybe talk a little bit more about this idea
Sure.
of what you were saying.
I think, okay, the first thing that comes to my mind as you asked that question was how most of the podcasts and YouTube content out there, I am, um, I really like freeze up when I see like the key is just to grind it out. And this is content often people I admire and love and respect. My favorite one being Gary Vee, who I consider a friend and who I've known since I was 16. He is the ultimate, example of like just like work your butt off and like you should hate it. It should suck. Um, but the problem is we get to that habit and we don't really reflect on the opposite, which is it can be easy. It can feel good. I do think that in your 20s, a lot of stuff is going to suck, and that's just inevitable. But there's that quote and that saying, what got you here will not get you to the next phase, right? And I think the same applies with if you created a business that got to being worth, say, a few $1,000,000 or, even 100 or $1 billion, you look at the Warren Buffetts and the Richard Bransons and a lot of the other people on the Forbes list who aren't as famous, as say Bill Gates or whatever, they, they built their business over the course of decades and they really let it compound. And if if you're burning out every 5 years and you're like, oh man, like I hate my job, I want to sell my company and get out, those people have a really tough time compounding their value. There's like too much like life change, right? So you sell your company, you pay half of it to the government and taxes, and then you got to come up with your next idea and start from scratch all over again. Like you're not gonna get to promised land per se. Um, and and also these other people, like their lives are just like very organically good on a day-to-day basis for 30, 40, 50 years, obviously with ups and downs along the way. But that really made an impression on me. Like I was 23, I think, and I went through the Forbes list of billionaires. I went through every single person, Jess, to figure out what are the common trends I can notice in them. And most of them were not working on flashy, get rich quick type of businesses. Like 90% of them were not in tech. They were building some boring, stupid business that I probably wouldn't even want to be part of because whatever. But that's besides the point. They were working on a boring, non-sexy business that they grew for 30 or 40 or 50 years. And they didn't make their wealth in a 5 year or 10-year period. I thought that was really fascinating. And and so the common theme from everything we're talking about today is what you read about and what you see on YouTube, podcasts, Wall Street Journal. That's the sexy narrative, but you probably need to spend more time and effort studying what's actually going on and what are the stories not told and what is the actual reality. And that will actually help you figure out what's real.
I think that is one of the most important things that's been said on this podcast in a long time. And I think it's because it's not as obvious. We can all open up our internet browser, open up our phone, and get so much business content, success content, investment content, entrepreneurship content. And it will be the stuff that gets clicks. It will not be a representative of reality type of distribution, right? It will be what's the most extreme, what's the most culturally relevant. It won't be like an accurate snapshot of how it's done broadly, right?
Mhm. Yeah, that's right. And so every single person you're seeing in the media who only talks about their successes and wins, like think about like what are all the different problems this person's probably facing today and not sharing and be honest to that. And there are probably many, and obviously have compassion for them too, but people don't want to talk about the real truth in public. And I think one thing that I appreciate about you is that you kind of bring out this honesty and authenticity in people. You know, and that's a superpower, and that's also how you build stronger relationships with people.
Well, mostly it's me trying to do self-programming of learning the mindsets of the people who have done the things that have stood the test of time. And I've done the skyrocket up, skyrocket down, and so I got very, very interested in the third time wanting to keep it permanently. It's not about the money you make, it's about the money you keep, right? And so it's like it's a great school. I'm really looking forward to you and Noah's podcast.
Thank
By the way,
you.
is there a website or where can people go to watch for the release?
Yeah. I'd say the best way to keep up to date with all the podcast videos and other content on me is go to my LinkedIn, search Jess Mah on LinkedIn. Or if you want to get invited to, I have behind the scenes at Mawe Zoom recordings that I'm putting out. Send an email to teamjess@mawe.com. We'll add you to the circulation. And and then Jess, once this gets published, I'll put this on my LinkedIn for everyone else to find. And I'm really excited to hang out with you more.
Well, thank you so much for the time. It's been great.
Thank you, Jess.
Okay, bye everyone.